non-refundable credit that's equal to 5% of the federal EITC. Proposal 12 would be to create a refundable EITC that would be distributed on either a quarterly, semi-annual, or annual basis. The FNA has stated that the fiscal impact of this, if it were a 10% EITC, based on 10% of the federal EITC, would be approximately $77.7 million for an average $261 credit for the estimated 297,000 Arkansas filers. Proposal 13 would be to create a refundable EITC that is equal to 5% of the federal EITC. That is estimated to have an impact of about $40 million, or would have had an estimated impact of about $40 million in fiscal year 2018.
Senator, you recognize.
And this might be a question for the Tax Foundation folks.
They're coming up.
Okay.
You would you identify yourself, Senator Urban has a question.
It's Jared Walzak with the Tax Foundation.
Is your mic on?
It is now Jared Walzak with the Tax Foundation.
Thank you, sir, Jared.
Hi, I'm right here. Thank you. I know we had looked at this as kind of a balance or an exchange, offsetting something else we would do if we did not pursue like the grocery tax issue. Would this be something that we could look at? We thought it makes sense in pursuing it as an offset to maybe changing the brackets, the income brackets, or anything like that. I mean, I'm just looking at which is the simpler thing to do and which is the more effective thing to do for these folks and then for our administration.
Certainly, I appreciate the question, through the chair. The earned income tax credit, the great advantage of this is really its simplicity. There are arguments pro and con. There are many who would argue that this isn't an ideal use of the tax code itself because it's really not a tax provision, but it is one of the simplest ways of addressing low income and not necessarily all the poverty level, but certainly low income support for working adults, especially those children. It is a good offset for other changes that you'd be looking to make within the tax code, especially those that favor neutrality, that favor growth, but may sacrifice something on the scale of progressivity, regressivity concerns. The EITC is often a very good offset with that. Arkansas is, of course, as you know, entirely unique in using three tables with the individual income tax. There are other unique elements of the code that have been addressed at the unusual elements of the NOL. I think that this can be a trade that can be considered in the context of several different changes. So to your question and point about the individual income tax tables, I think that if changes were made that had regressivity concerns but otherwise were perhaps favorable for the state's tax climate, this would be something you could do to address that, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator, are you finished?
Yes, sir.
DFA, y'all have anything else to add?
No, Mr.
We
Chair.
have nobody signed up. Anybody in the audience want to speak on this? All right. We have a motion. You're recognized. Senator Elliott.
Yes. I recommend the second motion, and move that we be allowed to work with DLR to further refine this item for inclusion in the final packet. Mr. Chair.
Second. We have a second. All right. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Citizens on the first day. All right. I think on the next one, we're going to combine items 14, 15, and 16.
So these proposals deal with the standard deduction and personal exemption. Currently, Arkansas allows a standard deduction of $2,200 for each taxpayer. In 1929, we started with a personal exemption of $1,500 for a single person and $2,500 for a married couple. In 1947, that was increased. And then in 1961, the state repealed the exemption and created a tax deduction that began as a deduction of $1,000 or 10% of the person's gross income, whichever is less, for people who had income under or $5,000 or more. For those who had income of $5,000 or less, it was equal to 10% of their gross income. In 1997, the standard deduction was increased to $2,000, and then in 2013, it was increased to $2,200 effective January 1, 2015. Iowa provides a standard deduction for single taxpayers and married taxpayers filing separately of $2,030 and a standard deduction of $5,000 for married taxpayers filing jointly. Louisiana has a combined personal exemption and standard deduction of $4,500 for single filers and married people filing separately, and $9,000 for married taxpayers filing jointly, heads of household, and certain widowers. They also offer an additional $1,000 reduction for each dependent and each taxpayer who is blind or 65 years of age or older. Mississippi provides various standard deductions based on your filing status. It's $2,300 for single individuals and married people filing separately, $3,400 for heads of household, and $4,600 for married individuals. Missouri ties their standard deduction directly to the federal standard deduction, which under the new Tax Cuts and Jobs Act increased to $12,000 for single filers and married people filing separately, $18,000 for heads of household, and $24,000 for married taxpayers filing. Oklahoma's standard deduction is $6,350 for single filers and married taxpayers filing separately, and $9,350 for heads of household, $12,700 for married taxpayers filing jointly. Tennessee does not have a standard deduction. Again, their income tax is limited to just based on income from interest and dividends. And Texas does not have a personal income tax, so it does not have a standard deduction. Then, in relation to proposal 15, in terms of the personal exemption, in addition to the standard deduction information, Iowa has a personal exemption of $40 for individual filers, dependents, and married taxpayers filing separately, and then a personal exemption of $80 for heads of household and married taxpayers filing jointly. They have an additional personal tax exemption of $20 for each taxpayer who is blind or 65 years of age or older. As I mentioned previously, Louisiana has combined personal exemption and standard deduction. Mississippi's personal exemptions, we have a chart there. They allow $12,000 for married filing jointly, $6,000 for married filing separately and single, $9,500 for head of family, and that includes one dependent, because each dependent other than the person, the taxpayer's spouse or the one dependent included for head of family is an additional $1,500. There's also an additional personal exemption of $1,500 allowed for each taxpayer or spouse who is blind or 65 years of age or older. Missouri has a personal exemption of $2,100 for each taxpayer who is entitled to a personal exemption under federal law. And then a resident with an adjusted gross income of less than $20,000 is allowed an additional personal exemption of $500 if they are entitled to a personal exemption under federal law. Under the new federal law, they eliminated the personal exemption. So right now there's a question whether Missouri has a personal exemption. The Missouri Department of Revenue has stated that the federal changes effectively eliminated Missouri's personal exemption, but some experts disagree on that. So it might be something that the courts will have to decide. Oklahoma has a personal exemption of $1,000 per exemption, and an additional exemption of $1,000 for each taxpayer or spouse who is 65 years of age or older, subject to certain income limitations or blind. This law went into effect, was effective for January 1 of this year. It's unclear whether the changes to the federal law are going to change Oklahoma's personal tax exemption as well. Tennessee has a personal exemption of $1,250 for each individual and $2,500 for joint filers. Additionally, Tennessee exempts the entire income for taxpayers who are 65 years of age or older if their income doesn't exceed a certain amount, and they exempt the entire income of people who are 100 years or older. And then Texas does not have any personal exemption, so they don't have personal income tax.
TFNA, y'all got anything you want to add?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right. Do you have any questions? We have no anyone signed up, anybody in the audience want to speak on this? Representative Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just have to have questions, you know, that is part of it. So when we, in the last session, changed it, below $21,000, it's not taxable anymore. In effect, that raised your standard deduction for those people, because that's just not taxable anymore. Deduction, you know, standard deductions aren't taxable. So is that kind of accurate, what I'm saying? It just made, you know, a broader range of money that's not taxable regardless of why.
That's correct, Representative Johnson. In terms of the change that was made to the lower tax table effective for January 1, 2019 going forward, is now a bracket that has a 0% tax rate. So for those individuals that file using that table, certainly before they have taxable income, does not kick in until approximately $42.99, I believe, is what the table would provide in 2019.
Okay.
On top of the deduction.
Could I have a comment, Mr. Chair, about personal income tax?
Sure.
Okay. I think everybody's aware of what I do, and I do. Besides coming down here and make a lot of noise that nobody wants to hear, I do tax returns in probably 15 other states, besides Arkansas, and California, Pennsylvania, and New York. They're crazy, but one thing about it, and I always hear how complicated our tax returns are, but when you take your federal tax return beside your state tax return, they mirror each other. You can follow. This is my wages, this is my wife's wages, this is half our interest income. Capital gains is the toughest one to reconcile between the two, but other than that, they really mirror each other well. So I'm not in favor of changing that a whole lot, because when a CPA is talking to their client, it's easy to show on a state return, well, this is your federal, this is what did count, you didn't get a deduction for your state. Your itemized deductions mirror. And so I just wanted to say that simplifying to where it comes off the federal doesn't always simplify it, depending on how we did that. If we were to go to that sort of system, it doesn't really always simplify it, especially if you're trying to explain it to someone else. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Anybody else want to ask any questions? Anybody want to speak on this? Do we have a motion to move this forward? Representative Dawson, you're recognized.
Yeah, I would move that I be allowed work to be our staff to further refine these items.
Items 14, 15, and 16.
Exactly, in the final package.
All right, got a second? Got a second? Representative Kavanaugh, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, members, we're going to move on to proposal 17 and 18. We realize that one of them is a tax and one is a study, but we're going to put these two together. So, Representative, you're recognized.
Well, these proposals relate to income tax triggers. Currently, Arkansas does not use income tax triggers to reduce income tax. Only a few of the states we looked at actually do. Again, Iowa, the bill they passed earlier this month includes some triggers for additional tax reductions and other tax changes beginning for tax year 2023. If their net general fund revenues for the fiscal year ending in 2022 is equal to or exceeds both $8,314,600,000 and 104% of the net general fund revenues for the fiscal year ending in 2021. If the conditions are not met for the 2023 tax year, then they'll just keep looking at it each year to see if it meets that threshold. And that would trigger the income tax reductions that I spoke about earlier. Missouri is looking at reducing their top rate from 6% to 5.5% over 5 years. If their revenue trigger is met, the top rate will be reduced by 0.1% each year. Their trigger is that the net general revenue collected in the previous fiscal year exceeds the highest amount of net general revenue collected in any of the past 3 fiscal years by at least $150 million. And then in Oklahoma, they started a 2-step tax cut that would reduce their top rate from 5.25% to 5%, and then from 5% to 4.85%. If the revenue projections would be adequate to reduce the rates on a revenue neutral basis based on at least 4% general revenue growth. The rate was reduced to 5% based on those triggers, but then they repealed the tax trigger in 2017. So proposal 17 would be to create an income tax reduction trigger that would reduce income taxes based on a formula using revenue growth adjusted for inflation and a corresponding reduction of government spending by a specific amount. It doesn't involve any specific numbers or anything at this point, and so DFNA said the fiscal analysis would obviously depend on the specifics of the proposal. And then proposal 18 would be to study potential mechanisms for creating a tax trigger using RSA to fund those reductions. The proposal would ensure that categories A, B, and C are fully funded, and then a new fund would be created to put any surplus into. That fund would be used to pay for future tax reductions. Again, without more specifics, DFNA could provide an exact analysis, but they stated that the proposal would be revenue neutral because the tax triggers would be paid for by the funds that was created with the surplus money. The department also provided some information about how that might work. And you can find that in their proposal. I won't go over it, but if you want, I'm sure DFNA would be happy to answer any questions about that. And that's it for those 2 proposals.
Representative Dawson, you're recognized for question.
I just have a motion for time.
Okay. Representative Dawson, you're recognized for question. Johnson?
No,
Did I say Johnson?
Yeah, okay. Now, what we do look
Well,
like.
you 2 guys are wearing the apple.
Is there any state that has reverse triggers? Let's say we put in triggers and the economy's good and the economy drops. We have reverse. Does any state have a reverse trigger? Because, I mean, I've read some articles that say North Carolina could run into trouble in 21, 22, 23. And I don't want to get ourselves, I would hate for this committee to get future people down the road when we're not here in a problem the state can't pay its bills. And we've seen Oklahoma, Kansas with that sort of problem. So I didn't know if any state had reverse trigger that. We never know when another 9/11 could happen or a housing market crash. I mean, just things happen that make the economy drop. And we look, does any state have protection to go through? Once it's dropped, and you're never getting it back. Because none of us want to vote for tax increase, I can promise you that.
So are you asking if any state has a trigger that would actually increase?
Now go
the
back
tax
to,
rate?
or remove the drop that had happened because the economy was good, the economy goes bad, it goes back to where it was. It's not like we're increasing that, we're just taking away what we gave before. I don't know if any state has that.
I'm not aware of it, but that doesn't mean it's not out there. I'd be happy to look and see what I can find, or
Maybe somebody knows.
you might know offhand.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Any other questions? We have no one in the audience signed up. Does anybody like to speak on this? We have the tax foundation coming up. Identify yourself and you're free to go.
In Jared Walls after the Tax Foundation, did want to address Representative Johnson's question and then some more general comments very briefly. No state currently does have a tax trigger that has a reverse provision where it would recapture or revert to the old tax rates. A number of them do, however, have a number of additional safeguards. They may have additional deposits into the rainy day fund. before a trigger is reached, they may require that there be multiple years of achieving certain revenue targets before a trigger is actually implemented. But in the same way that states tend not to have provisions where spending increases are automatically reversed, federal government actually has had sequesters and things like this. No state has ever done that, where if the budget, the budget is curtailed because of revenue inadequacy. There has not been a state thus far of the roughly dozen that have implemented tax triggers that have done this. The proposals here are also a little unique because they do have, particularly one of them has a spending component. And that makes them much more of a year-to-year legislative policy decision rather than a revenue adequacy decision. So that is not something we have generally seen in other states. What you do want to look for in tax triggers is a stable design that makes sure that you're actually capturing real revenue growth. So some states have done year-to-year revenue. The problem with year-to-year is exactly to what was stated, maybe in different context. You start out with a good year. Next year's great. Cut taxes. Third year, recession, don't cut taxes. Fourth year, you grow back to where you were, halfway where you were. You grew, you cut taxes again. And I don't think that's what anyone intends with a tax trigger. You want to make sure you're actually seeing real growth. So making sure you get the baselines and the benchmarks right, so it's not year to year, it's against a real baseline. It has its long-term inflation adjusted benchmark. These things can make sure that you're actually seeing real meaningful revenue changes over time before you implement something like this.
Any other questions? President Jett, your question?
Yes, you're good.
President Jett.
Oh, yes, sir. Based on that response, could DFA just come up and walk through the mechanism on the RSA? Because I think there's just a little bit of confusion there.
The concept that is in proposal number 18 is through using kind of the RSA as almost a trigger, for lack of a better way of putting it. This would require legislative action and a proactive component from the legislature where you would establish something in RSA like a C category or a B2 category and would have an actual amount that you would designate for that. For example, we use $40 million as an idea. That amount in that part of the RSA is dedicated to a separate statement from the legislature, a separate bill where the say the top marginal tax rate of 6.9% is going to be dropped to 6%. We'll use that as a cost of approximately $180 million. That means that you know about what every 10% would cost. So 40 million is about 0.2%. You then have the CFO with not discretion, but with a delegated set of authority. If we meet the spending amount in revenue stabilization, fully fund the amount of government that is determined to be required, and then have 40 million that flows into that C category, that is verified by the CFO. That triggers a reduction of the top marginal rate for the following tax year. And that $40 million that had gone into the C category is sent to something like long-term reserve, some other potential use to make sure that you actually have that play in the joints to pay for the tax reduction.